Do you believe a monster can save a life and then vanish for 30 years? I do, because when I was 12, I got lost in the frozen woods of Winding Hollow, Montana. I should have died that night. But I woke up warm, covered in a blanket, and beside me, massive footprints, too big to be human. People say old Walter Redfield was crazy, that he saw something in those woods and lost everything trying to tell the truth. But I know what saved me, and so does he. It wasn't a myth. It wasn't just an animal. It was Ash, and it remembered. Walter had seen it before, during the war, deep in the forest, where secrets don't make it out. He stayed silent for decades, until Ash came back, hurt, bleeding, not seeking revenge, but trust. We helped it, me and Walt, and in return Ash showed us something no human ever had: forgiveness. Years later, I came back to that cabin. It was empty, crumbling, but on the windowsill there was a fresh pine sprig, and in the fading light, I saw it, just standing there, holding the stone I gave it, watching, remembering. People call it a monster, but I know better. That night, the only creature that still believed in kindness wasn't human. I don't talk about that summer. Not much anyway. Most people wouldn't believe it, and the ones who might, well, they'd probably wish they didn't. But I remember it. Every second. The way the mist rolled like smoke through the trees. The way the silence pressed against my skin like wet cloth. The way it felt to wake up in a place I didn't recognize, covered by a blanket that didn't smell like people. I was 12. Too old to be a baby. Too young to be brave. I'd run off, stormed away, really, after the usual jerks at summer camp pulled another stunt. They'd taken my sketchbook, threw it into the creek, laughed while I cried, said I was weird, said I'd talk to trees. I remember gripping my backpack so hard the zipper popped. I didn't care where I was going, just away. Winding Hollow wasn't even on the camp's map, just dense forest and dead signals. I kept walking until my legs started to cramp, until my lungs burned from the cold, and then I slipped. The hill was slick with moss and hidden roots. My boot caught something, and the world turned upside down in a flash of branches and sky. I remember the crack, like dry wood snapping before the black took everything. When I woke up, it was morning. Pale light filtered through fog that clung to the ground like breath on glass. I was lying on soft moss, my backpack beside me, zipped shut like someone had taken care to protect it. And there was warmth. A heavy wool blanket lay over me, too big for a kid, coarse like something hand-woven. Next to me, a pile of firewood stacked neatly, dry despite the mist. The strangest part? A sprig of horsetail fern right on my chest, like someone or something had placed it there on purpose. At first I thought maybe a hiker found me, but there were no boot prints, no tire tracks, just impressions, like someone walked barefoot, but the feet were too big, way too big. I stood up, dizzy and sore, and tried to follow the direction I thought I'd come from. Hours passed. I didn't cry. Not yet. I was too focused on the silence, the kind that feels like it's listening. Eventually, I stumbled onto a narrow trail and followed it to a small wooden cabin. Smoke drifted lazily from the chimney. The roof sagged under old pine needles, and the front porch creaked like it hadn't seen visitors in years. That's when I met him. Walt. Tall, wiry, wrapped in layers of flannel and a coat that smelled like cedar and pipe smoke. His beard was gray, tangled, and his eyes held stories. Deep ones. He didn't ask questions right away, just looked at me like he already knew I wasn't supposed to be there. But he didn't seem surprised either. He let me sit by the fire, gave me tea that tasted like pine and honey, let me talk when I was ready. I didn't tell him everything, just enough, that I got lost, that something strange happened, that someone or something must have helped me. He nodded once, slow, said, "This forest remembers things people try to forget." I was wrapped in that same blanket when I noticed the corner, stitched initials in a faded thread. YUMBB. Is this yours? I asked. He blinked, then froze. My wife made that 30 years ago. Lost it in a flood. But you weren't there, I whispered. You didn't find me. He didn't say a word. Just looked out the window, at the trees wrapped in fog. His hand trembled as he reached for his pipe. I saw something shift in his eyes. Not fear, not confusion, recognition. Later that night, I curled up in a corner of the cabin. The fire snapped softly. Walt sat silently by the window, watching the woods like they might speak if he stared long enough. I couldn't sleep. Not really. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again, only pieces. Shapes between trees, a massive hand, fingers longer than my forearm, wrapped in dark fur. Eyes like deep water, sad and ancient, and strangely gentle. It hadn't touched me. It could have, but it didn't. It tucked the blanket, set the fern, kept the fire going. That night was the first time in my life I felt held. Not by arms, but by intention. Not once had anyone at camp done that. Not the counselors, not the kids, not even the ones who said sorry after laughing. But something out there had. Something that wasn't human, but somehow felt more human than most of the people I knew. I didn't tell Walt what I saw. Not yet. But I think he knew. And I think he'd seen it too. That was the beginning, the first thread, and whatever had saved me out there, it wasn't finished with us. Not yet. The first time I saw the footprints, I thought I was dreaming. It was early. The sky was still that soft gray that comes before the sun decides what kind of day it's going to be. I'd barely slept, kept tossing on the old cot Walt had set up for me, listening to the wood creak under every breath. The smell of cedar smoke and damp pine clung to the air, and outside the cabin, the forest sat still like it was holding something in. I got up quietly, slipped on Walt's oversized boots, and cracked the door open, just enough to let in the cold. That's when I saw them. They weren't close. Maybe 15 feet from the back of the cabin, near the patch of soft earth where the rain had turned the moss into a sponge. But they were there. Huge, deep, wider than any boot I'd ever seen, and barefoot. No treads, no rubber sole, no heel. Just 5 distinct toes, a wide arch, and a stride that said this wasn't someone shuffling along. Whatever made those prints walked with purpose. I didn't say anything right away, just stared. My breath turned white in the air, the mist swallowing it up before it could go far. I turned back toward the cabin and saw Walt at the window, already watching. He didn't move, didn't wave me inside, just stared. Later that morning, he opened a drawer under the old stove and pulled out a leather-bound notebook. The cover was warped, the corners curled like old leaves. He didn't say a word, just handed it to me. Inside, the handwriting was messy but strong. On the first page, underlined twice, were 4 words. It came back again. I looked up. He hadn't blinked. His mouth was tight, jaw working like he was chewing on something that wouldn't go down. He took the notebook from me, flipped a few pages, and pointed to a date. August 12th, 1969. Next to it, saw it. Eyes like coals. Smelled like earth after lightning. I was your age, he finally said, voice rough. Maybe younger. I didn't ask what he meant. Didn't need to. He sat down hard in the old rocking chair, the one that always sounded like it was complaining about the weight of time. His hands rested on his knees, fingers tapping in some quiet rhythm only he understood. They made me shut up, he said after a long pause. Back then, I was just a rookie on the patrol team. Went out with 2 others, Riley and Dutch. Dutch never came back. Riley swore it was a bear, said Dutch panicked and fell, but I knew what I saw. He looked at me then, really looked, like he was checking if I still believed in the world we were taught to believe in, or if I'd seen enough to start questioning it. What did you see? I asked, even though part of me already knew. He didn't answer right away. Got up, walked to the bookshelf that was mostly dust and old coffee tins. reached behind one of them and pulled out a photo. Old Polaroid. Faded. Edges yellowed like paper left in the sun too long. He held it out to me. It was a picture of him, maybe in his 20s, standing by a jeep. Behind him, partly obscured by shadow and trees, was something off. At first glance, it looked like another ranger. Tall, standing upright, but the longer I stared, the more wrong it felt. The shape wasn't right, shoulders too wide, neck too short, and the eyes, if you looked just right, seemed to reflect light like an animal's at night. "That's where you were found," he said. "Same clearing, same week, different year." My mouth went dry. I asked if he ever tried to go back. He shook his head. "They told me not to. Said I imagined it, that it was trauma." Riley backed them up. I figured if I talked, they'd think I was crazy. Maybe they were right. I got quiet, took the desk jobs, stopped going deep into Hollow. "But you stayed here." I stayed to listen. He said it like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like waiting was part of his blood now. That afternoon, I helped him clean the attic. He said it hadn't been touched in over a decade. Dust came down in clouds every time we opened a box. Old ranger gear, broken lanterns, a stack of comic books so brittle the edges crumbled when I touched them. Then I found a box under the loose floorboard, taped shut, label smudged. Walt went still when he saw it. He knelt beside me and tore the tape off. Inside were more photographs, journals, an old recorder with dead batteries. But it was the last photo that made him freeze. It was a shot taken from inside the cabin, through the window facing the woods. The angle was awkward, like it had been taken quickly. And outside, barely visible through the glass and mist, was a shape. A figure. Same spot where I had been found. Walt held the photo like it might burn him. "This wasn't me," he whispered. The room went quiet again. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like a warning. He stood up, grabbed the journal I'd seen earlier, flipped to a blank page, and started to write. His hand trembled at first, but then it steadied. When he finished, he didn't say the words out loud, just turned the book so I could read it. "This time, I won't stay quiet." He closed the book and set it by the window, the same one from the photo, and I sat beside him. Neither of us spoke after that. We didn't need to. The cabin creaked around us, and the light outside turned gold, then gray, then something darker. The forest was watching, and for the first time in years, Walt was finally watching back. It started with that sound again, wet, sharp, dragging through the trees like something wounded. It was just after midnight, the kind of hour where silence feels too still to trust, like the woods are holding their breath, waiting for you to move first. Rain had come and gone, left behind a cold mist that clung to the windows like frost fingers. I couldn't sleep. Not since Walt had shown me that photo. Not since I knew that whatever saved me wasn't a ghost story from a dusty ranger journal. It was real, and maybe still close. The sound came again, low, guttural, like a moan swallowed in mud. I shot up from the cot, heart pounding. Walt had left the fire burning low, a single ember throwing red shadows across the floorboards. I didn't call for him. I just grabbed the flashlight, pressed the button until it clicked, and stepped out barefoot onto the porch. The air was thick, the kind of thick that makes your skin tighten with instinct. The flashlight beam cut through the fog in shaky lines, bouncing against the wet leaves and old wooden fence. I could still hear the sound. Closer now. A struggling breath. A body against the ground. I followed it. Walt's cabin backed into a stretch of forest that felt older than everything else. Trees here weren't just trees. They were watchers, tall and knotted, dripping with lichen, their roots like veins pulsing beneath the soil. I stayed on the path Walt used to chop wood, stepping over the stump pile, around the rusty barrel he'd once used for burning scraps. Then I saw him. He was already there, standing a few yards ahead, still as a gravestone. "Walt," I whispered, stepping closer. He didn't turn, just raised a hand, soft, as if telling me not to make a sound. That's when I saw it. At first, I couldn't make sense of the shape on the ground. It was too big, too dark, twisted wrong. The flashlight trembled in my grip. I aimed it toward the noise, and that's when I caught it in full. There, tangled in a snare trap made of wire and barbs, was something alive, huge, covered in thick dark fur soaked with rain and streaked with blood. The creature's thigh, was clamped in a mess of twisted steel. The trap had been buried deep under fallen leaves and brush, hidden like a secret, the kind people never admit to setting. It was breathing fast, painfully. Each breath came out ragged, like it scraped against broken ribs. Its arms, longer than anything human, were digging into the mud, clawing at the earth as if it could bury the pain. But it didn't roar. It didn't scream like a monster in some movie. It cried, a sound too raw for anything else. I felt my whole body lock. It wasn't some wild animal. I don't know how I knew, but I did. The way it moved, the way it clutched at its own leg like it understood the damage, the way it turned, slow, shivering, and looked at us, eyes catching the beam of my flashlight. They were amber. Not glowing, not menacing, just sad, ancient, frightened. Walt stood like stone. I turned to him, expecting the same recognition I saw the night he showed me the photo. But this time, there was something else on his face. Guilt. A deep, sick kind. The kind that hollows a man out from the inside. "Is that—" I started. "I set that trap," he said, voice like gravel. "Years ago, back when I thought I was protecting people." His hand slid to the hunting rifle strapped across his back. "No," I said, stepping in front of him before I could think. "No, Walt." He didn't speak. The creature pulled again, its claws digging into the mud, trying to twist free. But it only made the wire cut deeper. Blood oozed around the steel, thick and dark, steaming in the cold. "Don't," I said again, louder. I could feel the heat of the flashlight in my hand, the damp soil under my feet. "You said people didn't believe you. That's why Dutch died, because nobody believed." He looked at me, really looked, like he was seeing something in my face that cracked the shell he'd built around his. "Then don't let this die because you don't believe." His eyes dropped. Slowly, he unshouldered the rifle and laid it in the moss. I moved first, crawled forward, close enough to smell the earth and sweat and copper in the air. My fingers trembled as I reached for the trap. The creature didn't move, just watched, chest heaving, trusting. The wire was thick, rusted, bent into teeth. I wrapped both hands around it and pulled. It didn't give. Walt knelt beside me, pulled a hunting knife from his belt, and began sawing. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't fast. But we didn't stop. The rain came back in a whisper, a fine mist falling from the trees. By the time the last strand of wire snapped, my arms were shaking, my fingers raw. Blood had soaked through my sleeves. The creature still didn't lash out. Instead, it pulled its leg free, slowly, carefully, and sat upright. One massive hand pressed to the ground, the other lifted toward Walt. Not to strike, not to grab, just held there, palm facing him. Walt looked at it, at the deep claw scars along the forearm, at the muscles twitching with pain, at the eyes that had every reason to hate us, and didn't. He reached out, pressed his hand, rough and human, against the furred palm. For a moment, everything went quiet. Not forest quiet, soul quiet. Then the creature pulled its hand away, turned, and limped into the trees. One slow step at a time. We didn't follow. We didn't speak. We just sat there in the mud, bleeding, breathing. When we stood, I saw the blood on Walt's hands. Not just a stain, a mark. He wiped it on his shirt like it didn't matter. But I saw the way his shoulders dropped, the way his breath shook. The trap was broken, but something else was too. Or maybe, finally healing. We walked back in silence, rain whispering in the leaves overhead. I didn't know it yet, but that night would change everything. The way I saw the forest. The way Walt saw himself. We didn't talk about what we did, but that silence wasn't heavy anymore. It felt earned. And somewhere behind us, limping deeper into the hollow, was something that didn't roar like a monster. It remembered mercy, and we remembered how to give it. Walt didn't say anything the next morning. He just lit the stove like usual, scooped coffee grounds with the precision of a man who needed routine more than caffeine, and waited for the kettle to sing. I watched him from the old rocker near the window. The sky was still the color of bruises, and the trees swayed like they knew something was coming. Neither of us brought up the night before. The blood, the trap, the creature. Maybe we both hoped if we held still enough, the memory would pass like a storm. But that kind of night doesn't just go away. It stays. It settles. By noon, Walt started clearing out the old woodshed behind the cabin. It hadn't been opened in years. He said it used to hold tools before the roof caved in one winter. The door groaned like it was waking from a long sleep, and the air inside smelled like wet rope and rust. He didn't say why he was clearing it, but I knew. It showed up again the next night. Not close, not loud, just present. We heard it before we saw it. Branches brushing against each other in ways they weren't supposed to, breath heavier than wind. Walt opened the cabin door, stepped out with a lantern, and stood still. I followed behind him, heart thudding like it wanted to get out of my chest. There it was, lurking just beyond the firewood stack, limping, watching. Its leg was still stiff, the wound raw, but it had wrapped something around it. Moss, bark, maybe even our old dish towel. I stared at that thick fur, soaked in dew, and I swear, for a second, it almost nodded at us. Walt gestured slowly, low and wide, then backed away toward the shed. The creature followed. No words, no force, just understanding. It ducked into the shed, barely fitting through the doorway. Inside, we'd laid out a tarp, dry branches, an old wool blanket, and a tin of water. It didn't touch any of it that first night. Just curled up, slow and careful, and stared at the wall like it was waiting for something to attack it. But nothing came, and by morning, it was still there. Over the next few days, we learned how to move around it. Or maybe it learned how to move around us. Walt kept his distance, always cautious, always watching. I, on the other hand, got closer. I brought it food, not meat. Walt said he'd seen it chew on roots and bark that first time. So I collected things. Forest apples, boiled sweet potatoes, chopped carrots. It didn't eat in front of us, but the food always disappeared. One afternoon, I noticed it had left something behind. On the step outside the shed, balanced carefully like it mattered where it landed, was a stone. Smooth, perfectly oval. Its surface had been rubbed so clean it reflected the sunlight like water. I picked it up and turned it in my hand. It was warm. I showed Walt. He blinked, slow, said nothing. The next day, there was a flower. Wild, purple-blue, the kind that doesn't grow near the cabin but deep in the valley where the creek cuts through. I found it on top of the pile of chopped wood. Then came the shell, a spiral shape, polished, glowing amber. We were 200 miles from the coast. I asked Walt what it meant. He finally answered, "It's saying thank you." He wasn't joking. He wasn't guessing. He knew. That night, we sat in silence on the porch. Crickets chirped. A breeze rolled through the pines, and behind the shed, we could hear it breathing, deep, steady. I asked Walt if he was scared. He looked down at his hands for a long while, like he was trying to count every scar that had gotten him here. "I used to think everything out there that wasn't human had to be either threat or food," he said. "It's how I was raised, how I trained. You see a shape in the dark, you raise your rifle, not your hand." He glanced toward the shed. "But sometimes," he said, "you meet something in the dark that lowers its eyes before you even move. That's not weakness, that's choice." That stayed with me. I started calling it Ash. Quietly, to myself at first. Because of the patch of silver-gray fur behind its shoulders, like smoke curled into its back. The name felt right. He didn't mind it. Or maybe he just tolerated me. I would sit outside the shed and draw. Ash would sit inside, breathing slow, calm. Sometimes he'd lean forward when I turned the sketch pad to show him. His eyes would follow the pencil strokes, his fingers twitching like he remembered the motion. He never touched the paper. But once, he reached down and set another gift at my feet. It was a pine cone, carved with markings, not random, not clawed. Patterns, swirls, lines, like symbols passed down in a language I didn't know. Later, when I showed Walt, he said something that cracked a space inside me I didn't know existed. My son saw those same markings. He disappeared into the attic and came back with a journal. Old, leather, cracked at the spine. He flipped through the pages, his fingers trembling like he was afraid of what he might find. There it was, a sketch, done in rushed charcoal lines. The same symbols, drawn by someone who had once lived in that cabin. A young ranger with a wide smile and too much trust in the system. Walt's voice broke when he said, "My boy saw him too." And just like that, the walls that had kept everything locked behind his ribs started to shift. He sat down hard, the journal in his lap, and stared at the drawing like it could pull back time. His eyes glazed, not with fear, but with something deeper. The kind of sorrow that sinks into a man and never leaves. I told him to forget it, he said. Told him it wasn't real, that he imagined it. He didn't fight me, just got quiet. Went back into the woods. Week later, they found his badge, and nothing else. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. I just reached over and held the pine cone. The one Ash had left. The one Walt's son must have held before. And in that quiet, where memory and grief bled into the same breath, Walt finally let it out. The sound wasn't loud, but it shattered everything. A man who hadn't cried in 20 years broke. Outside, the wind picked up. Trees swayed. And from inside the shed, I swear I heard Ash shift, as if even he could feel the weight lifting. Not erased, not fixed, just finally shared. And somehow, in that moment, it didn't feel like a monster was living in our wood shed. It felt like someone else who'd been carrying a wound for too long. Finally found somewhere safe to put it down. It started with blood. Not a lot at first. Just a smear on a flat stone near the old creek bed where Walt used to set his game cameras. He said the rain might have washed it from somewhere upstream, but we both knew better. Ash had wandered farther than usual that week. He'd been restless, listening to something in the trees we couldn't hear. Some nights I'd catch him standing near the ridge just before dawn, perfectly still, head tilted toward the wind like it was telling him something. We didn't see the first group arrive, just the tire marks, big ones. Fresh, deep in the mud. Walt found them near the trailhead by the abandoned mine, where no one had driven in years. Not unless they had a reason. And whoever came in didn't stay quiet. I remember the sound of metal clinking off metal, gear being dragged, dogs barking sharp in the distance. Not wild dogs, controlled ones, trained. Walt didn't say anything at first. Just stared at the tracks and spat on the dirt. Then he walked back to the cabin, opened the gun safe behind the pantry, and pulled out a hunting rifle I hadn't seen before. It looked heavier, older. He cleaned it in silence, sitting at the table while the sun set and the shadows in the cabin stretched out like long fingers. That night he told me about Mason Briggs. They'd served together once. Rangers. Same patrol unit. Same camps. Same silence when strange things showed up in reports. But Mason had a different take on it. He wasn't scared of the unknown. He wanted to own it. The kind of man who believed if it bled, it could be mounted on a wall. Walt said he hadn't seen him in over a decade, but when he saw the boot print near the creek bed, broad heel, chipped sole, he knew. They're not here to understand, Walt muttered. They're here to take something. 2 days later, they found the trail. Bits of fur stuck to bark, a few drops of dried blood on pine needles. I knew Ash had been careful. He always was. But injured or not, he was still a living thing. And living things leave signs. We tried to warn him. That night, I snuck out to the woodshed with a flashlight and my sketchbook. I whispered to the darkness, told him people were coming, that they were armed, that they didn't care who he was or what he'd done. He stepped forward just enough so I could see his eyes, that glow, that weight. He didn't flinch. He just bent down, placed a flat stone on the floor between us, another one of those polished gifts, and disappeared into the night. The next morning we saw the smoke, down past the old quarry, black and twisting up into the sky. Walt said it wasn't from a campfire. It was rubber and oil. Someone had lit something on purpose, marking a place, or signaling others. We hiked out at first light. The woods were too quiet. No birds, no insects, just footsteps, ours, and the echo of something darker behind them. That's when we saw them. 5 men, dressed in camo and flannel. Their gear looked military, but their movements said something else. Too loud. Too proud. Like they didn't think anything could touch them. One of them held a drone controller. Another walked a bloodhound straining at the leash. And in the middle of them stood Mason Briggs. Walt went pale. Not scared. More like bracing for impact. Mason smiled when he saw us. That kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Like a man who's already decided you're not important enough to shoot, but might change his mind. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, chewing a toothpick. "Didn't think you'd still be hiding out in this hole, Walt?" Walt didn't answer. "You've seen it, haven't you?" Mason said, voice lowering. "I can see it in your face. Same way I saw it in '69, before they made us burn the tapes. But you, nah, you kept chasing ghosts." "No ghosts," Walt replied. "Just truths you were too afraid to face." Mason chuckled. "Don't matter what it is. 10 grand says its skull goes for triple that on the black market. Already got buyers lined up. Just need a clean shot." I felt my fists curl. Walt stepped forward. "You need to leave." But Mason's eyes landed on me. "Who's the girl?" "She's not your concern." "Well," Mason said, tipping his hat back, "you'll want to keep her close. It's going to get real ugly out here." Walt didn't argue. Just turned, shoulders tight, jaw locked. I followed. We didn't speak till we got back to the cabin. That evening, Walt started packing. Just the essentials. Rope, flashlights, canteens. A map I hadn't seen before, one he said his son had drawn. It showed a narrow pass beyond the falls, a place Ash might reach before they did. But before we left, Walt did something that made my stomach knot. He dug into a drawer, pulled out an old tin box and opened it. Inside was a bullet. Not lead, silver. "I made this back when I thought it was just a myth," he said quietly. Back when I didn't understand. He held it in his palm for a long time, then put it back in the box and locked it shut. "I'm not that man anymore." We were about to leave when we heard barking. "Close, too close." Walt looked at me once, sharp. "Stay behind me." We crept toward the edge of the tree line. Just beyond the rise, through the mist, we saw them again. The dogs were sniffing. One had caught something. Then, gunfire. Not at us, somewhere deeper, toward the ridge. Walt didn't wait. He sprinted through the trees, fast for a man his age. I chased him, heart pounding in my throat. Branches scraped at my arms, roots tried to pull me down, but I kept moving, because something inside me knew Ash was running, and they were closing in. We reached the ridgeline just as the last light of day faded behind the trees. Walt raised his binoculars, scanned the tree line, then froze. I saw it too. Ash limping hard, moving toward the waterfall trail. And behind him, Mason, gun raised. No hesitation. I opened my mouth to scream, but before the sound left my throat, something happened. Ash turned. Fast. Faster than he should have with that leg. And in one motion, he leapt. Into the brush, out of sight. Mason fired, missed, cursed. But someone else caught the flash. One of the hunters, camera slung on his chest, snapped a photo. Click, flash, static burned into the moment. Walt grabbed my arm. "We have to move, now!" I didn't ask why, but I knew something had changed. They weren't just hunting anymore. Now they had proof, and proof spreads like fire. Walt whispered under his breath as we moved. Maybe to me, maybe to himself. If I have to trade my life for his, I will. And in the distance, I could still hear Ash breathing. Still running. Still alive. For now. It was the kind of night the forest holds its breath for. The rain didn't fall. It crawled. Mist rolled in low and thick like it was being poured from the sky in silence. You couldn't see past the next tree. Couldn't hear anything but the distant hum of water and your own pulse. The kind of night where even the owls go quiet and you swear the trees are watching. Ash was gone. Walt noticed first. The woodshed door hung open, one hinge blown loose, pine needles scattered across the dirt like a fight had happened. At first we thought they'd found him, that maybe we were too late. But then we saw the prints. Deep, erratic, one dragging behind. They led away from the cabin, not toward safety, but deeper into the valley. He was running, not from them, toward the hunters. Walt went cold. His whole body stiffened like a soldier hearing a shot he thought he'd buried in the past. He grabbed the rifle, didn't say a word. Just looked at me, eyes hard, and we moved. I followed him through the pines, through the wet and dark, my lungs burning with every step. My boots caught in roots. Branches slapped my arms. I didn't care. Somewhere out there, Ash was limping into danger, and none of us knew why. But Walt did. "He's leading them," he said, breath short, voice low. "He's trying to draw them off." I felt my throat close. I couldn't say anything, couldn't breathe right. The thought of him bleeding in the dark while those men followed with guns and flashlights, and that damn drone buzzing overhead, it made something inside me twist into a knot that wouldn't come loose. We heard the dogs first, barking sharp, cutting through the trees like knives. Then the crunch of boots, the static of radios, the crack of a branch under someone too heavy-footed to be forest-born. Walt pulled me behind a ridge, motioned for me to stay low. We watched from the ferns, our bodies pressed into wet ground. Two men passed just yards from us. One held a tranquilizer rifle, the other a machete. Neither looked scared. That made them worse. Farther down the slope, the sound of rushing water grew louder. That meant we were getting close to the stone falls, a cliffside ledge where water spilled over the rocks like a silver curtain. Below that, nothing but jagged drop and shallow pools. No one survived a fall like that. Ash was cornering himself. Unless he meant to jump. No, he wouldn't. Not like that. Not unless... A scream cut through the trees. Not an animal. Briggs. We ran. By the time we reached the ridge, Briggs was dangling by one arm, gripping a rock outcropping, legs swinging over nothing but air. The edge beneath him was crumbling. His face was twisted in shock, lips pale, eyes wide. Ash was above him, standing at the ledge, shoulders heaving, soaked from head to toe. His chest rose and fell with each breath. Blood streaked down his leg like a river. But he didn't growl. He didn't roar. He just looked at Briggs, then reached down. I didn't understand it at first. I thought maybe he was going to shove him. End it. Just one push, and everything that man had done would vanish into the rocks below. But that's not what Ash did. He reached with both arms and pulled Briggs up. He grunted, strained, and Briggs came scrambling over the ledge like a dying animal, gasping, covered in mud. He collapsed at Ash's feet, eyes wild. Ash stepped back, limped once, then turned his back. Didn't look at him, didn't threaten, just walked away. Walt stood beside me, rifle lowered. He was crying, and he didn't even try to hide it. We walked down to the ridge slowly, cautious. The rain had picked up, falling sideways now. Briggs sat there in the mud, silent, too stunned to move. When he looked up and saw Walt, he didn't say anything, just shook his head. He saved me, he said, voice breaking like gravel. Why? Walt stared at him a long time. Then he said, "Because you didn't deserve to die stupid." That was the only mercy Briggs got. He left that night. Didn't take the others with him, didn't give a speech. He just walked back the way he came. The camera guy, the one who took the picture, snuck off after him, whispering something into a phone. I saw the flash drive glint in his palm. That was the part none of us saw coming. One click, one photo, and the world changes. But in that moment, it didn't matter. We followed the trail Ash had taken. Found blood on the ferns. Bark peeled off trunks where his shoulders had scraped by. Walt led the way with the lantern, careful not to call out. Ash didn't want us to find him. Not yet. We finally spotted him at the base of a pine grove, slumped near a hollow log, hand clutching his leg like he was trying to hold his whole body together. I went to him first. I sat in front of him, legs crossed, my jacket soaked and sticking to my skin. I didn't touch him, just sat. He looked at me. His breath rattled. Then slowly he opened his hand. Inside was something small, a strip of cloth, red flannel. Walt's old shirt, the one his son used to wear. It had been cleaned. I turned to look at Walt. He froze. Then he walked forward, dropped to one knee beside Ash, and whispered something I couldn't hear. Ash closed his eyes. Walt placed a hand over his, not gripping, just resting there. "I was trained to pull the trigger first," he finally said out loud. "But you've got more discipline than any soldier I ever knew." Ash didn't speak. He never did. But he stayed, even as the night got colder, even as the dangers circled tighter. We stayed there until sunrise. No one came. No gunshots, no dogs, just the three of us. A man, a girl, and something no one had a name for. Walt lit a fire beside us and sat with his back to the wind. I wrapped Ash's leg in gauze we tore from my backpack. When the flames warmed the air enough to breathe again, I whispered, "We're not done. You know that, right?" Ash didn't move, but he didn't leave. And for now, that was enough. The sky bled open that morning. Not red, not gold, just a pale gray soaked in cold. The kind that settles in your spine and makes everything feel like it's happening from inside a dream. We didn't sleep. None of us. Not after what happened at the ridge. Not after Briggs walked away with shaking hands and nothing to say. Ash hadn't moved much through the night. He just sat there near the smoldering fire pit, shoulders hunched, arms wrapped around himself like he was trying to hold in something ancient and breaking. His breath was slower now, labored, but not defeated. Walt had said we had one shot left, one trail, one bridge. The only way out of Winding Hollow that wasn't marked, patrolled, or buried under maps the state had forgotten. And even that was a gamble. A wooden footbridge older than both of us, stretching across a chasm so deep you couldn't hear a rock hit bottom. We left just before dawn. Walt moved like someone walking out of a life he never meant to live. Pack slung over one shoulder, rifle across his back but untouched. He didn't talk much, just gave Ash a quiet nod before motioning him forward. I stayed close. Not because I was scared, but because I didn't want to forget anything. The way the frost clung to the edges of the pine needles. The way Ash limped, heavy but steady. The way the trees opened up like they knew this path was different, final. The hike took hours. We didn't stop. The farther we got from the cabin, the more the air changed. Cleaner somehow. Like we were crossing into a part of the forest the world hadn't poisoned yet. No more gunpowder in the dirt. No more broken bottles or boot prints. Just stone and root and the hush of something sacred. When we reached the bridge, I almost didn't see it at first. It wasn't much. Just a thin span of timber stretched across the rocks like a spider's thread. Moss-covered, fraying at the corners. But it held. And beyond it, dense wilderness. Untouched. Maybe even safe. Ash stood at the edge for a long time. Didn't move. Just stared out at the trees across the ravine like he was trying to remember what it meant to disappear without running. Walt stepped forward and unslung the small pouch from his belt. Inside it was something I hadn't seen him carry before. His old military ID, bent, weathered, still bearing the photo of a younger version of himself, jaw clenched, eyes hard. He held it in his palm for a second, then looked at Ash. "I carried this too long," he said, voice gravel and wind. "Thought it meant I was something solid, but it's just metal, just a name they gave me." He reached out and placed the ID in Ash's hand. "You keep it," he said. "I don't need it where I'm going." Ash didn't flinch, just looked at it. Then him, no sound, just the wind rustling through pine needles like distant applause. We stood there for a while, no one saying what we all knew. That this was it, not an end, but something close, like a page turning. Then Ash reached into his satchel, pulled out a stone. Not just any stone. It was carved, perfectly shaped. On its face were two hands, one large, one small, etched to meet in the center, fingers just barely touching. He placed it at the foot of the bridge. Then he turned to us, slowly, his gaze resting on Walt first, then me. I thought I'd be able to say something. I thought I'd find the words to tell him how much it all meant, how he changed me, saved me, how I'd never forget. But nothing came, so I just nodded. Ash turned back, stepped onto the bridge, and crossed. It didn't take long, but it felt like forever, and when he reached the other side, he didn't stop. He didn't turn around. He just disappeared into the trees. The wind picked up, and then he let out a sound. Not a cry, not a growl. It was a kind of song, low, echoing, not sad, not angry. Something more ancient. A farewell that didn't need translation. The forest responded. All around us, the trees shifted. Birds stirred. Water below churned like it had been waiting. It was like the land had been holding its breath for him, and now it was exhaling. Walt looked down at the carved stone, knees creaking as he knelt, running his fingers over the etching. Then he stood, shoulders heavier, but somehow taller. I opened my journal and wrote one line. He never spoke, but he taught us everything we forgot. We didn't speak on the way back. Didn't need to. The woods weren't silent anymore. They were listening. I came back in the winter, not for the answers. Those stopped mattering a long time ago. Not even for closure. Closure's just a word people use when they don't want to feel anymore. I came back because I owed something to the place that raised me after everything else gave up. To the woods that once swallowed a terrified little girl whole, and then gave her back. It had been almost 20 years. The road up to Winding Hollow was worse than I remembered. Potholes filled with frozen rain, branches clawing at the sides of my truck like the trees didn't recognize me anymore. But I did it anyway. Drove slow, let the engine hum low, like I was asking permission every mile. The cabin looked smaller now. Not just from time, though it hadn't held up well. Roof sagging, porch half sunk, door hanging a little crooked like it had finally exhaled. But it wasn't just that. I was older, different. I'd lived whole lives since then. Exhibitions, cities, noise. But none of it ever really stuck to me. The world didn't feel like home. Only this place did. I parked and stepped out into the snow. It was quiet. Not empty, just waiting. That kind of quiet where the silence isn't hollow. It's full. The moment I crossed the porch, I felt it. That ache in the chest that only memory knows how to bruise. The cabin door creaked like it remembered my weight. Inside, everything was covered in dust thick enough to write a name in. I didn't. Some names shouldn't be disturbed. I left most of it untouched. Didn't sweep, didn't rearrange. Just let the stillness sit around me like a blanket. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out the painting. It wasn't large, 2 feet across, oil on canvas, dark around the edges like memory tends to be. In the center, a tree line just after dawn. A man and a creature sitting under a bent pine, not facing the viewer, not even moving, just being. Their backs against the tree trunk, side by side, watching the light crack open the forest. The way it had been that last morning. I walked to the old fireplace mantel, still charred in places from the years we'd kept it alive. and set the canvas there gently. It didn't need a frame. That night, I stayed in the cabin. No electricity, just a flashlight and a few hand warmers tucked into the sleeves of my coat. The firewood pile had collapsed long ago, but I didn't need heat. I needed memory. I watched the frost creep across the windowsill, slow and silver. Every hour or so, the wind would push against the glass, soft at first, then stronger, like something was trying to speak without words. And then, just before sunrise, I saw it. A shape, far across the clearing, tall, still. At first I thought it was a tree, but then it moved, not toward me, not away, just standing there, watching, as if to say, I see you. I remember. He didn't come closer. He didn't need to. That morning I found something on the windowsill, a pine sprig, fresh, just laid there, still green, even with the frost clinging to it. I didn't touch it, just stood there for a long time watching the forest slowly exhale with the rising sun. Later, when I made it back to the main road, a group of kids on bikes passed me at the edge of town. Maybe middle schoolers, maybe younger. One of them slowed down beside me, chewing gum and eyeing my boots. "Hey, are you the lady who paints forest stuff?" he asked, not unkindly. "Just curious." "I guess I am," I said. He nodded like that made perfect sense. "My cousin said he saw someone near the cliffs yesterday. Big guy, like really big, not a bear. Said it waved." I smiled, but didn't answer. The kid shrugged. "Anyway, he's dumb. But he said it left something on the porch, like a twig or something, right where your old house used to be." They rode off. I watched until they vanished behind the bend, laughing about something I couldn't hear. I never did tell anyone the whole story. Not even when the gallery in Portland begged me to explain the Hollow series, or when reporters asked why I never showed my face in interviews. I let the painting speak instead. They always knew better than I did what needed to be said. But I'll say this now, because maybe it matters to someone. The forest remembers. It remembers pain, kindness, silence, mercy. It remembers the ones who walked gently, and the ones who chose not to pull the trigger. Whatever he was, Ash, he never needed saving. He needed space. He needed time. He needed someone to see him and not flinch. And I guess so did I. We were both just trying to outrun the noise. Trying to find the edge of the world where no one hunted you for what you looked like or how you moved or what they thought you were supposed to be. Sometimes I still hear him. When the wind cuts right. When the light slips through the trees just enough to make the shadows feel like they're breathing. And I think maybe we left something behind for each other. A mark, a scar, a seed. It didn't matter that the world never believed. The forest did, and that was enough. Some stories don't end. They just echo. In a world that moves too fast to feel and too loud to listen, sometimes the quietest places carry the deepest truths. There are corners of this earth where mystery still breathes, not to frighten us, but to remind us that wonder hasn't died, that compassion can bloom in the most unexpected spaces, that mercy isn't weakness, but strength in its rawest, most honest form. Because in the end, it's not the facts we remember, not the headlines or the noise. It's the stillness, the way someone looked at another and chose not to harm, the way silence can be louder than violence, the way something wild paused long enough to be seen. There's a beauty in the things that remain unnamed, in the stories passed through glances, gestures, and footprints that vanish with the morning frost. These moments ask us not for belief, but for presence, not for proof, but for empathy. Maybe the greatest truth is that we are all just trying to find our way through the wilderness. Some of us with maps, some with scars, some simply with the hope that we're not walking alone. And in those rare times when paths cross, between what we call human and what we don't have words for, it's not fear that saves us. It's choice. The decision to see, to accept, to extend grace even when we don't understand. If this story meant something to you, if it stirred a memory or softened a place you forgot needed softening, then maybe it's done what it came here to do. Thank you for listening, for feeling, for walking into the woods with me. If you believe in stories that live beneath the surface, stories not just told, but felt. I invite you to leave a thought in the comments. Tell me what stayed with you, what made you pause. And if you'd like to be here when the next story finds its voice, don't forget to subscribe. This forest still has many secrets to share. Until then, stay kind, stay curious, and listen closely. The quiet knows more than we think.